Hi, I put together a little movie here to help you do some simple navigation. So what I have here is a movie that has 3 pages. We have a start page, and I have some animation in here. So the start page is going to animate to this, and then we're going to stop it and basically create some buttons that allow us to go on to the next page. Then the next page has a different style animation of the text moving in, and then that'll kind of stop, and we can stop the timeline again. And then we'll have page 2. It's just another animation. And if you test the movie right now and watch it, it's just gonna, there's no pauses or stops. It's just kind of flying through, and it loops by default. It just kind of continues on. So we're gonna add some buttons and some action script that will help us with this. So to start off here, we have our start come up and it pauses there. And I've kind of just blocked these out in 30-second frames. So I'm just at the end of this start group. I'm going to add, at the top I have an action script layer, and this is where I can put my script to control things. So I'm going to click this frame, right click, and I'm going to insert a blank keyframe. And for script, you actually have to have a keyframe. So we might run some kind of script in frame 1 and then run different script down here. You pretty much have to have a keyframe each time you want to run some script. So I'm going to select that keyframe. Then I'm going to go to my Actions panel, which I have up here, or you can go to Window, Actions. I'm just going to do a basic stop. S-T-O-P, these parentheses, and a semicolon, which ends every action script statement. Now if I test the movie, it stops where I put it. So we can't really continue on until something else happens. So we're going to add a button to make something else happen. But first, I'm actually going to go ahead and add stops at the end of each of these other segments as well. So right click, insert blank keyframe, go to Actions, Stop. Go down here, right click, insert blank keyframe, stop. So now we have stops in the right places. So our next step then is to kind of worry about the buttons. So I need a new layer that's going to have my buttons. And let's see. So for a button, I'm going to just do a basic shape. I'm not going to. Now a button could be something you design in Photoshop or Illustrator or whatever you want to do, but I'm just going to use something simple. This is going to be kind of like just a next button, so I'm going to put it down here in the lower right corner. It's a common place to put a next button. So I'm going to make sure I select that whole button, the stroke and the outline, or the fill and outline of the graphic. And I'm going to convert this to a button symbol. So I'm going to right click, and at the very bottom, you can't see it if it's off screen, but there in this panel that comes up, we have convert to symbol. You can also get to that by going modify, convert to symbol. We'll change the type to button this time, and we'll just call this next button. And I think I'm gonna call this. No, this is fine. Next button. And right now, this button runs across the entire timeline. I'll probably change that. So I'm going to right click here where the page 1 starts, and I'm going to insert a blank keyframe and do the same for here. Or actually, I'm sorry, let me undo those. I'm going to hit Command Z on my Mac or Control Z on your PC to undo. I'm actually going to right click and do insert keyframe. Sorry again, that's off stage. And what that does is makes a copy of whatever I have in the previous one. So then, but the difference here is now I actually have separate button instances at each point, which will be important later when I add script, because I'll be doing different things with the buttons. So here in frame 1 we have our button. Now if you want to use the button in code, what we have to do is the button has to have an instance name. So I'm going to go to the Properties panel, and right at the top it says Instance Name. We have to give this a unique name, and I usually try to do something different than what I've named the button in the library. So I will say Start Page Button. I'll do it like that. So now it has a name and we can refer to it in code. So now we can go in frame 1 is where we want this button to start working. So we can go to the keyframe we have in our action script and we can open up our actions panel. And here's where we add the code to do the buttons. So we got a clean slate here, and what I'm going to do is use that button name. So I already forgot what it was because I have a short attention span here. Start Page Button. I'll just copy that, and I'll go over here and I'll paste Start Page Button, so our button name. And what we do is we add what's called an event listener to it. So we type add event listener. What this essentially does is says, okay, for this button you need to pay attention to what happens to this button. We need to pay attention for a mouse event, particularly a click. So if this button named Start Page Button receives a mouse click, then we're going to run a function, and we'll call that function go to page 1 in parentheses and our semicolon. It's good to comment your code. In ActionScript it's pretty easy to do. Do 2 slashes like this, and this is, you basically just explain what your code below it's doing. So I could just say making Start Page Button listen for a click. You could describe it pretty much however you want, but commenting can be good. So the next thing we need then is that function we're going to call go to page 1. So function to go to page 1. So to create our function, you say function, then the name of the function, go to page 1. And for the inside, basically what this little bit of script says is, it is to explain it basically, it's syncing up with, here we're looking for a mouse event and it's kind of getting passed along to the function. But that's pretty much what you have to have in there. Event, mouse event, void, which means it returns, functions can return things, but that means it returns nothing. Then you have your opening bracket, and if you hit enter, Flash creates that closing bracket for you. Then everything that happens in between here is what happens when this function is called. What we want to happen when that button is pushed, we want to go to in the timeline and play at frame label page 1. Now I put these frame labels in. These are easy to do. They also require keyframes like ActionScript. But you have that keyframe selected. Then in your properties it says label up here, and you can give it a label. These labels are good because now in our script, let me go back to the script. Oops. Actually, I was putting the script in the wrong spot. Oh wait, where did my script go? Oh, yeah, I was putting it down here in my buttons. That's the wrong place. Make sure, so I'm going to copy and paste this out. Or I'm going to cut it. So edit, cut. I'm going to go to the right place. Always try to keep your script in the ActionScript layer. Edit, paste. You'll notice this import statement. I didn't type that. That just popped up. Flash needs these extra import statements depending on what kind of code you write, and it just does that for you. You don't really have to worry about it too much. So in our function, we want to go to and play. Notice that I have a lowercase g here, uppercase A, uppercase P. These kind of things are important. The case is important for event, for mouse event. Pay attention to what case it is because your code may not work if you don't have exactly what it is. But there's a function called goTo and play. It's a function that's already built in. And I'm going to put a quote, and that's what you do for frame labels. Now you can jump to frame numbers, like I could say goTo and play frame 30, semicolon. Now it would essentially do the same thing. The only problem is if I ever go back, and let's say I make my start animation part longer, and page 1 ends up at frame 50. Now I have to go back and change all my numbers, and if you have a lot of these kind of things, it could be a lot. So instead, I'm going to use the frame label, because if I end up moving all this down, the frame label is going to be the same, so it'll be easier. Like, you won't have to change your code at all if you add more frames. So frame labels are usually better than frame numbers. So now we should be able to test this. We'll test our movie. It stops at the end of that start sequence, and now we have our button. If it is a button symbol, when you roll over it, it'll turn to this little hand that you can push the button with. Once I click it, we're listening for the click, and it goes to and plays at frame 30 and continues on. Now there's also goTo and stop. If you wanted to go to a certain frame and stop, you could do that, but I actually want it to play because I want it to play that first animation there. So moving along then, let me go back because I'm going to select all this code, edit, select all, edit, copy, because I'm going to kind of reuse this in the next time. We have to change a few things, but so now we're on page 1, and we have a new button here. We have it because I copied a different keyframe. I have a different button instance. You can see this instance name hasn't been assigned. So we can call this page 1 next button for that instance. And then in frame, let's see, 30 here, we're going to insert a blank keyframe, and we need to add some code for that button. So I'm going to paste all that code I just did, and I need to change my button names. So the first one I called start page underscore button. I kind of like that format. So I'm actually going to go back to this button and kind of make that similar. Not the same, but I'm going to do it kind of similar format. Page, or actually let's say page 1 button, like that. Then I'm going to go back to my code here, and I'm just going to paste that in, page 1 button. So that's the name. We're listening for the click. This time, we're not going to go to page 1, though we're going to go to page 2. So I have to change that function name to go to page 2. This is the function, so we got to change that to go to page 2. And then what happens when the function is called, we change goTo and play to go to the different frame label, page 2. And that should pretty much do it. I can test the movie. Click the button to go to page 1. It stops because I put that stop in there. And they can click again, and it should take us to page 2. And it stops as well. So that's sort of your next button. Now we could also do like a previous button if we want to. We could drag out another instance of this previous over here. And I could edit, copy, and I can add that in the same. Well, okay, let me pay attention to where I actually put this. Edit, cut. I actually want it to be in the buttons layer with the other button. Edit, paste in place. We'll put it exactly back to where I had it before. I want to add one to frame 1 as a separate instance, and this frame here as a separate instance. Actually, in frame 1, there is no previous, so we don't actually need that button even to be there, necessarily there, because it kind of doesn't make sense. You can't go back when you haven't started yet. But on these 2 pages, it makes sense. So we need to give this one a name. So this one we called page 1 button. And now I see that's not a great name. I should have called that next button or something. But this one we can call page 1 previous button. And then on this one we can select it and call this page 2 previous button. So if I were to do this again, I'd probably call this page 1 next button instead. And kind of like the first one, my page 2 actually doesn't need a next button because we'll say that's the last page, so that doesn't make sense. We can just delete that. Now I have to go back to my code, so I can go to frame 30 here because we have a new previous button. And basically we can just copy this code and make a listener for that button. So this one, so we have page 1, I'll just copy that to make sure I don't mess it up. This name is called the page 1 previous button, and for this we're going to call a function called go to page go to start. Then all we have to do is copy this function code and make a new function, change the name, go to start, and what we wanted to do is go to and play the start label, and that's perfect. Then for this code, let's see, we haven't done this code yet, so right click, insert a blank keyframe. Let me borrow this code from over here so I don't have to, kind of makes it easy. Paste. And so this one we want page 2 previous button, and we're going to call the function go to page 1. Our function needs to be go to page, well, here's something tricky. We actually have a function already called go to page 1 that we did over here. In the first frame. Flash will complain sometimes if you use the same function name more than once. I think we can probably, since we wrote it in frame 1 and we've already been to frame 1, it already knows about this function. So back here we actually don't have to write the function again because it basically already knows about it, if that makes sense. So when the page 2 previous button is clicked, call function go to page 1, which we already wrote before, and that should take us back to frame 1. We'll see if that works. Let me go back to this code because I noticed I need to adjust my comments a little bit. Now we could add another comment. We could separate these and say a comment for each one, or we might just say create listeners for buttons, make it a little more general. And then we could say functions to go to pages. Okay, that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and test this and see if we have any errors. So we have our start. We go to page 1. We want to go back. We can do that. Page 1, page 2, go back to page 1. We have sort of our forward and next buttons. Now there are ways to do this without creating so many functions. There's kind of some tricks, but I want to kind of keep the concept simple in this case, so we don't want to make it too complicated at this point. I would like to clear this out though and show another way of doing some navigation. So I'm just going to delete my button layer altogether. I'm going to go to frame 1. I want to see my stage here a little better, so I'll hide my actions panel. I'm going to clear out all my code here as well. I'll leave the stops because we still want those. But I'm going to clear out some of this other code I added, and we'll start fresh. So in this case, the way I want my navigation to work is more like you would see on a website where you see the navigation all the time and you can jump to any page you want at any time. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to use this same button. I'm just going to keep this simple. And I'm going to make 3 little dots in a row. By the way, if you ever want to make sure these are aligned, select them all. Go to Window, Align, and then you have your align options, and you can hit that, and that'll make sure they're all lined up there, and you can distribute them equally. Oop, wrong one. This one. And let's just say that we have these buttons are going to represent the 3 pages. Now I could put a number for each one and make different buttons, or you could also have text as buttons that say page 1, page 2, page 3, whatever. But I'm just going to keep it simple. Sometimes little simple interfaces like this are nice too, but I need these. Each button needs to be named differently. So I'm going to call this. I'm just going to keep it real simple. BTN1, BTN2, BTN3. They all have instance names. And I wasn't paying attention again, and I put all these in my ActionScript layer. So I'm going to grab them, edit, cut. I'm going to make a buttons layer, which makes more sense. And I'm going to edit, paste in place, and that'll stick them back there. And I still have my instance name, so that's good. Now notice this time I'm not going to create keyframes at each of the pages. These buttons are just going to be the same buttons that are there throughout the whole movie. So now all we have to do is add the code to make it recognize the buttons. So I'm going to go to the ActionScript up here in frame 1, go to my Actions panel, and I need to make event listeners for each button. So I'm going to do button 1 dot add event listener mouse event. I'm looking for a click, and then for button 1 we're going to go to and play start, and we're done. Now we could put some comments at the front. I could say listen for clicks on all buttons. And then I'm just going to copy paste this twice and then change the names here. Oops. And where we're going to page 1 for that button and page 2 for the other button. Wait, I'm kind of skipping it. I need the function names here. I'm doing this wrong. Sorry about that. I'm going to call a function called go to page, or go to start, and then close that. Yeah, sorry about that. And then go to page 1. Yeah, we got to call the functions, not actually go to page 2. There we go. That's better. Then we have to create those functions. Now I do want to show you one thing. Test the movie. I got a bunch of errors, so I did something wrong here. Add event listener. Ah, I see what I did. I have a typo here. I have add event lister, where this needs to be listener. So you'll notice that when I did do that, I got these errors, and it tries to kind of tell you line 3, you have a problem, that kind of thing. And that can kind of usually point you in the right direction of where you need to look and be more careful. That compiler window, that error window, can come up depending on how you have this set up. It might pop up down at the bottom. Close that. But so let's fix that. Listener. There we go. You notice that it's blue. If you actually type the function names properly, they'll change colors. Now let's test the movie. And now it's just complaining because I haven't created those functions yet. So let's go ahead and make those. So we'll say button functions, and we'll do function go to, I got a typo up here too. I just want go to start event mouse event colon void bracket, and then I want to go to and play start at the start label, and that is it. And then I can copy this function name twice, and I'll change this one to function name go to page 1. And we'll go to frame label page 1. And this one, go to frame label page 2, and we change this to go to page 2. And I can test the movie, and it starts, it does my first animation up to the start. And notice if I click that home page, it actually kind of starts and goes back to the beginning. Guess that's not a huge deal. And then click page, the middle button, it goes to that second page. You click this button, it goes to that page. But instead of our forward next buttons, we can actually just go jump around whenever we want, wherever we want, at whatever time we want. So depending on what your animation is doing, you might only want them to go forwards and backwards, or you might want them to be able to jump to any specific step. It really just depends on what you're doing. And that's pretty much it. I'm going to show you for a few basic navigation options here. Hopefully that will help you out.